going to try something a little different. I'm playing with Screencast-O-Matic to see if I can get this to work right. And I can already see that it isn't. There it is. There it is. We're going to pick up where we left off with our last um, talk about. We left off with brainstorming. When we're brainstorming, we are writing everything down. We've talked about that. Everything gets written down in that so you can go back and correct it later, or you can adjust it as you go. You don't want to make the kids feel like they don't know what they're doing. If you're looking at working in groups investigations, as you're discussing, you generate more discussion and you get much more engaged learning. Teachers create puzzling situations or present unusual stimuli as a means of causing students to become curious and learn how to inquire and investigate to gather information. One of the students last semester used an escape room for her lesson that she taught for her supervisor. She had five or six different stations, and at each station the groups rotated, and at each station they had to solve a puzzle that went along with the unit they had been working on. This was a culminating activity for a unit, and they had to work on a puzzle, solve it um, with the story that they'd been working on in order to move on to the next station. Of course, the overarching theme was Jumanji, and they used the escape room with the different places in the book Jumanji, but they worked on the skills and the strategies that they had used in that book and during the study of that unit, and only if they got them all done and done correctly could they escape the room. Of course, she and the teacher, the classroom teacher, were monitoring as they went and helped if necessary. But I thought that was really a cool thing. When you're working with group investigations, to the extent that reflective teachers are sensitive to their students' concerns, they may wish to allow students time to talk about the event. Sometimes they're called teachable moments. Something will come up in your classroom, in your discussion. Something's going on in the world. Something just happened overnight. And a child stops and asks you about it. It's called a teachable moment. It's okay to stop what you're doing, to stop where you are and adjust to help that child understand. When I taught second grade, and our room, or from our windows, we were on the second floor, looked right out at the flagpole. And one morning, the children came into class, into the school, and when they looked out the classroom window, they noticed that the flag was only halfway up the flagpole. And one of the kids asked me about that. Well, that was at the bombing of the Murr building in Oklahoma City, and the flags were then at half mast. So we stopped and we talked about it. That was a very terrible thing that happened. And then we also talked about how do you put a flag halfway up the pole? Well, you take it all the way up and then you bring it back down. So it led to a good discussion. Those are teachable moments, and you may have some of those, especially if they are inquiring, they're investigating, they're trying to dig deeper for information. The first discussion when you work on students and you're letting them discuss may be simply a time to let them air their opinions and express their feelings about the event or the topic about which you're going to be speaking. You need to let them do that, because in doing that, you can see where they're coming from. You understand, you get the idea where they're coming from, you get the idea of what they're thinking, how they're thinking it, and the way that they're coming about that information. If you decide that the event is a worthwhile issue, the class may be encouraged to read about it, ask questions, interview other members of the community, bring back their findings for more expanded discussion. One of the things that you have to remember, and I know I've said this before and I'm going to say it again, The events that you are living through at this point in your life, 10 years down the road, 15 years down the road, your students are only going to be reading about this in history books. And believe me, this will be in history books. This is unprecedented, never happened in recorded history like this. Although there have been times when there have been pandemics in the known world at the time, but it wasn't as populated as it is in so many places. This will only be in history books. Now would be an excellent time for you to be gathering, printing off things on off the net on these all of these CDC recommendations, all these things to just put back for later, because especially you social studies folk, you're going to use this down the road, I guarantee it. The things that you're discussing and you pull in, you can interview even members of the community, members of the school district, all different kinds of people. These in turn may lead the students to form small investigative groups that attempt to discover as much as they can about the event and suggest solutions to the problems or issues under discussion. This, what's going on right now, I will guarantee you, long after I'm gone, will be debated and discussed about what could have done, what should have been done, how it should have been done. And 20 years from now, people will probably look back on this and say, boy, that was silly what they did, because now we have this, this, and this. Well, it's the same when I think back to things that have happened over the course of my lifetime. Now we would look at them and say, well, that was really silly the way people reacted to that or did that. But it's all we knew at the time. So you have to you have to roll with it. The teacher's role in this kind of an investigation is to encourage students to find out more about the subject and allow them opportunities to express their opinions and share their findings. Now, you have to be careful about them expressing their opinions, because you have to be certain that you have established in your classroom a complete safe environment in which all opinions are valued, all discussion is valued. Nobody's going to say, well, that's just stupid. You cannot allow that. If you want these kids to feel free in your classroom to discuss, to give their opinion, to talk about what they're looking at, then you need to set those parameters straight up from the beginning of the year. There is none of that allowed in this classroom. Under the guidance of a caring, reflective teacher, this type of discussion is authentic learning at its very best. The kids are learning from what they're researching, but they're also learning from each other and from you. And you, in turn, are probably learning some things from them. This is hands-on, authentic learning at its finest. When teachers want to stimulate curiosity and discussion, they can present a social dilemma or demonstrate a strange event. Now, you have to be very, very careful here. You have to know your audience. You have to know your students. You have to know your community. There are some communities in which some discussions would not be deemed appropriate. You have to know what's going on and how things are going to be done. When I was in school, I know that's 100 years ago, but when I was in school, the big deal, and it was either the parents were all for it or they were totally against it, even after I started teaching, and that was sex education. And there were a lot of people, a lot of parents who felt like sex education had no business in the school. And other parents said, well, yes, it does, because they need to learn about it. Well, it's starting to make a comeback now, from what I understand, in the schools. They're trying to get it back in the schools. And you're going to see the same thing happening all over again. Some parents are going to say, go for it. And some parents are going to say, no, 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 no. We used to, years ago, we used to teach a class actually called critical thinking. The term critical thinking is not a separate and distinct concept, but we used to think it was. We used to treat it as if it were. That is different from higher level thinking processes and problem solving. It overlaps them. We used to seriously think that critical thinking had to be taught separately from everything else. We now see the folly of that and know that no, it critical thinking comes in with the discussions if you pose questions correctly, if you turn things on their head, so to speak, and have students look at them from different angles. It's almost like taking a glass and turning it so you're looking at it through all the different facets that might be cut into the glass to see how the sun shines, how it hits the glass here and there. You just keep turning things. Logical thinkers are prepared to deal with a single issue in depth. That's me. I'm a very logical, very concrete thinker, but sometimes they're not prepared to deal with unexpected evidence or ideas that may be stumped when they're asked to think outside of the box. That's me. I don't do that very easily. It takes me time to process. They may also be not able to deal with complex ideas that defy one right answer all the time. I struggle with that. You have to know your students. You have to be able to get in their heads and know how they think and how they process, which is why you're not going to jump into a deep, in-depth critical thought discussion before you've hit some of those other things that we've already talked about to so you get a handle on these kids, how they think and how they discuss. Now, I'm going to throw this in here right now. When you are working with your students and you are holding a discussion and they are giving you answers, you never let them off the hook. I can't tell you how important that is. You never let them off the hook. You always make them explain why they gave you that answer. What makes you say that? What's your evidence? Where in the text does it say that? How do you know that? Where did you find that? You always make them explain their answer. You have to get in their head and they have to be able to know how they came about that answer. Don't ever let them off the hook. If you are asking a yes or a no question, you always, always, always follow it up with why or why not, unless it's just you just want to know surface level information. But if it's a yes or a no, if you ask it in that way, you need to ask what makes you think that? Where did you find that? How do you know that? Why do you think that? Why don't you agree with that? You always make them justify. Critical thinking, then, is partially defined as a complex set of thinking skills and processes that are believed to lead to fair and useful judgment, only if they know how to get down the road. You have to lead them. Through the use of problem solving discussions, students learn the best technique of brainstorming and applying criteria to select the best solution. They have to have discussion. They have to be in these discussions. They have to be thinking and through these thought processes. Some of your classes are not going to have this type of scenarios. You're not going to have big, long discussions. You're not going to have big questioning things. But you need to put them in situations that they have to think their way out of. Even if it's not a big discussion or a big question answer session, give them a math problem that's just a little over their head and see if they can figure out how to solve it. Put them into a situation in a PE class where they have to come up with a different solution to get done what they need to do. You have to put them in uncomfortable situations so they can figure it out on their own. Critical thinking involves more than simply training children to use a set of strategies. It involves establishing some effective goals for students to support them in becoming more independent and open minded. We have to develop these kids to be thought